Today's video shows the fatal outcome of when illegal climbers attempt the world's deadliest mountains. From a woman who unclipped from her permitted line and clipping onto Everest's fixed ropes, to a climber who bypassed every checkpoint and illegally pushed deeper into the mountain. It was May 17, 2016, and the pre-dawn cold at Camp 3 on the Lhotse face held at -20 degrees Fahrenheit. The camp clung to a narrow shelf chopped into the ice at 23,500 feet. Tents anchored by screws driven into blue ice that creaked under thermal stress. Stacy Lusk was 44, from Scottsdale, Arizona, a real estate executive with a legitimate climbing resume. Denali, Aconcagua, multiple Himalayan trekking peaks. She had planned to climb Everest, but missed the permit deadline and lost her guiding slot. She took a discounted Lhotse position instead, accepted on paper, never intended to climb Lhotse. Her climbing Sherpa was Pemba Chotar, 33, with 7 Lhotse summits and 4 on Everest. Small in stature, but his endurance at altitude was something bigger climbers couldn't match. Throughout the expedition, Stacy kept asking detailed questions about the Everest route, where it split from Lhotse, how the ropes were set up above Camp 3, what the traverse across the yellow band looked like. Pemba figured she was just curious. Other Sherpas later called it reconnaissance. I'll be real, when I was putting this story together, the reconnaissance part caught me off guard. This wasn't impulsive. She spent weeks gathering intel on a route she was never supposed to be on. On summit push morning, team climbed above Camp 3 in the dark, at around 24,500 feet, where the Lhotse route continued straight, while the Everest route cut left toward the Geneva Spur. Stacy unclipped from the Lhotse line and clipped onto the Everest traverse rope. Pemba called out right away. She waved him off and kept moving. He followed and told her straight. Her permit was for Lhotse. She had no oxygen cached on the Everest route. No Sherpa support above this point. She'd be arrested on descent. Stacy told him the permit system was a money grab, and she was already past the point of turning back. She called it a money grab. I need you to sit with that. The permit system exists because people die on this mountain every single year, and the woman calling it a scam is about to prove exactly why it exists. Pemba radioed base camp. Every response said the same thing: get her off the route. He blocked the fixed rope at the yellow band and laid out the math. Her oxygen was calculated for a Lhotse summit, not the extra hours Everest would take. Without supply cached above, she'd run out. Stacy pushed past him. Pemba refused to follow. He unclipped from the Everest rope and went back down to the Lhotse line. Stacy was alone on the Everest route, above 25,000 feet. She made it to around 26,200 feet on the Geneva Spur before the oxygen math became undeniable. She turned around, but she'd been above 24,500 feet for hours longer than planned, exhausted, hypoxic, moving through terrain she'd never seen before. On the traverse back, she missed a clip-in point on an exposed section of rope. She tumbled several hundred feet down the face before coming to rest against broken ice. A Sherpa team found her the next morning. Pemba Chotar was questioned by authorities for 2 days. His answers never changed. He warned her, blocked her, radioed for support, and refused to enable the decision. He was cleared, but other Sherpas said he was quieter after that season. 2 days of questioning for a man who did everything right. That part genuinely made me angry. He warned her, he blocked the rope, he called it in, and he still had to sit in a room and justify himself. It was October 7th, 2018, at the Mount Wilson radio towers above Los Angeles, California. The access road was closed for the night, and the compound lights cast long shadows across steel structures rising into the dark. Wind moved steadily through the towers, producing a low metallic hum that carried down the slope. The area was quiet, controlled, and not meant for visitors after hours. Aaron Pineda was 24. An electrical apprentice working towards certification with a regional contractor in the San Gabriel Valley. He was curious, mechanically minded, and comfortable with heights, traits that made him well suited for his trade. Co-workers described him as eager and confident, sometimes too willing to learn by doing. He had no sponsors or affiliations, but he admired tower technicians and talked often about moving into communications work. Aaron spent his free time watching climb videos and studying tower layouts online. He believed ladder cages and internal shafts were designed to prevent falls, an assumption shaped by partial understanding. Communication towers use vertical ladders broken into sections, connected by platforms and cross-bracing. Inside the shaft, a fall is constrained, but not stopped. And there is no built-in arrest system without personal safety gear. That night, Aaron and two friends jumped a perimeter fence to explore the site. They chose a tower with an internal ladder, assuming it was safer than an exposed climb. Posted warnings and restricted access signs were ignored. None of them wore harnesses or carried fall protection. The climb began casually, with headlamps illuminating rungs and bolts as they ascended. As they climbed higher, the spacing between ladder sections increased. Transition points required stepping sideways and shifting weight around cross-bracing. Wind inside the tower intensified, pushing against their bodies and rattling metal. Aaron went first, moving quickly, calling down that the next platform was close. While transitioning between ladder sections, Aaron shifted his right foot outward to reach the next rung. His boot missed by inches. With his weight already committed, his hands lost purchase. He dropped vertically inside the shaft, striking the first set of cross braces with his shoulders and back. The fall continued uninterrupted. His body slammed repeatedly into steel members, each impact changing his orientation. The sound was violent and continuous, metal against bone, echoing inside the tower. He reached the base in seconds, landing flat on concrete with massive force. His friends descended as fast as they could and called emergency services immediately at 9:18 p.m. They reached him but could not move him safely. He was unresponsive, with visible deformities to his torso and legs. Emergency responders arrived in approximately 12 minutes and pronounced him dead at the scene. The medical examination found his spinal column shattered in multiple locations, with the chest crushed inward and severe internal bleeding. Major organs were ruptured, and the trauma was unsurvivable. Death occurred within moments of impact, before any aid could be effective. Investigators documented the climb using phone footage recovered from one of the friends. The footage showed the unsecured ascent and the moment Aaron disappeared downward. No structural failure or environmental anomaly was identified. The ladder and tower were intact and functioning as designed. The incident was recorded as a fatal fall from restricted infrastructure. Aaron's employer reviewed the case internally and expanded safety briefings for apprentices. Regional tower operators tightened access controls and reinforced fencing at similar sites. The danger wasn't dramatic. It was one missed rung. It was January 8th, 2020, at the winter-closed trailhead for Mount Washington. Fresh snow covered the lot, broken only by a lone snowplow, and a wooden sign warned of extreme avalanche danger. The air was bitterly cold, and wind carried powder from the slopes. Clouds clung to the peaks, softening their outlines, while the occasional raven called across the mountains. Trevor Ashford, 42, stepped out of his Subaru and photographed the warning sign with his phone, not as a deterrent but as proof. A software engineer from Burlington, Vermont, Trevor was no stranger to winter hiking. He had completed the New Hampshire 48 4,000-footers twice, summited Rainier, and tackled several other winter peaks. He wasn't reckless, or at least, he didn't think he was. What he trusted most was technology, GPS, offline maps, weather apps, and a fully charged battery pack. Paper maps were optional, compasses a last resort. Then Trevor planned to follow an alternate route from a 2-year-old hiking forum post, a summer approach from the east that bypassed the closed trail. It seemed straightforward, 7 miles round trip, 3,500 feet of elevation gain, 6 hours. What he didn't realize was the track was from July 2017, in perfect summer conditions. In winter, snow hid trails. Landmarks vanished, and creek crossings became dangerous. Details his GPS couldn't reveal, and he never questioned. He started hiking at 8:15 a.m., snow crunching under his boots. The first mile followed a forest road, hard-packed and easy to navigate. Trevor's phone showed his position as a blue dot on the GPS line, and he paused once for a quick selfie. By mile 2, the trail left the road, steep and blocked by snow-covered logs and dense brush. The summer trail was invisible, but he pressed on, following the GPS, moving slowly over hidden hazards. Above the tree line, the wind bit through his layers, and deep snowdrifts made each step exhausting. By midday, clouds rolled in fast, reducing visibility to barely a few hundred feet. Within 40 minutes, Trevor was in a full whiteout, the world reduced to blinding white, with depth perception gone and the terrain impossible to read. Trevor stopped, relying on his phone for navigation. That's when he noticed the battery, 12%. Panic surged. The battery pack he had connected earlier had died silently, drawing power from his phone instead of charging it. For the past hour, the device meant to protect him had been draining his lifeline. The screen went black within minutes, and he was left alone on the mountain in near zero visibility, with no navigation tools and no way to call for help. He forced himself to keep moving, deciding to head downhill in the hope of reaching the tree line. Every step was uncertain. Snow erased his footprints almost immediately. The wind scoured the slope, swirling with snow that cut into his exposed face. The temperature was dropping rapidly, and hypothermia began to set in. Trevor's hands and feet were numb, movements slow, thoughts foggy. He stumbled repeatedly, each fall leaving him weaker than before. Time became meaningless. Trevor tried to recall landmarks, the sun's position, wind direction, anything to guide him, but the whiteout obliterated all reference points. He picked a direction that felt downhill, moving cautiously, leaning into the wind, hoping the tree line was just ahead. He sank through crusted drifts, breaking through hidden pockets that swallowed his legs. Fatigue mounted. Each movement required almost unbearable effort. Eventually, Trevor collapsed. Search and rescue documentation later described him in a seated, curled position, consistent with attempts to conserve heat. Hours passed in severe wind, cold temperatures, and limited visibility. Exposure to these conditions proved fatal. Trevor's body was found 4 days later by a search team in a snow-filled depression below tree line. His phone battery was dead, with the GPS track still stored in memory. His pack showed unused equipment and extra provisions. The official report listed hypothermia and exposure as the cause of death and documented travel beyond the seasonal closure and reliance on a single navigation method. It was April 23, 2014. Ice climbing routes along a popular frozen waterfall corridor in Colorado had been closed for the season due to rapidly deteriorating ice conditions. Spring temperatures had been unseasonably warm for 2 weeks, with daytime highs in the mid-50s, causing significant melting and structural weakening of the ice formations. Nola Presswick was 29, a graphic designer from Portland with 2 seasons of ice climbing experience, including a dozen successful ascents of moderate WI3 and WI4 routes in the Cascades and Rockies. She was visiting Colorado for a long weekend and was disappointed to find her target routes closed. Despite the closure, she decided the warnings were overly cautious and planned to climb a route called Bridal Veil, a WI4 grade waterfall approximately 120 feet tall that formed over a rocky creek bed. Late-season ice becomes structurally unsound as spring temperatures rise. Repeated freeze-thaw cycles create internal weaknesses, causing the ice to become rotten, honeycombed with air pockets and prone to sudden, catastrophic failure. Visual inspection from below is often insufficient to detect rottenness, as the surface can appear solid while the interior has deteriorated. Ice screws may pull out under minimal force, and entire columns can detach from the rock with no warning. Water flowing beneath ice formations accelerates melting from below, further compromising stability. Nola arrived at the closure signs around 6 a.m. when the temperature was a relatively cool 38 degrees Fahrenheit. She hiked the approach trail and reached the base of Bridal Veil around 6:45 a.m. The waterfall looked intact from below, with a blue-white surface that appeared solid in the early morning light. She could hear water rushing beneath the ice, but attributed this to normal spring runoff. She geared up and began climbing around 7 a.m. The first 40 feet went smoothly. The ice accepted her tool placements with satisfying thunks, and her crampons bit securely. She placed 2 ice screws as protection, both of which seemed solid. Her confidence grew. Around 50 feet up, Nola noticed the ice quality changing. Her tools were penetrating more easily, almost too easily, and creating larger fractures around the impact points. She paused and tapped the ice with her tool. It sounded hollow in places, with a distinct difference from the solid tone she was accustomed to. She considered descending, but continued, reasoning she was already halfway up. At approximately 65 feet, Nola swung her right tool into the ice for her next placement. The tool punched through the surface entirely, penetrating into a hollow cavity behind. Before she could react, a vertical crack shot downward from the impact point. A section of ice, roughly 4 feet wide and 10 feet tall, detached from the underlying rock face. Nola's tools ripped free. The ice column, with her standing on it, tilted outward and fell away from the wall. She dropped backward through open air, still attached to the falling ice by her front points. The ice screws ripped out instantly. They had been anchored into the same rotten section. She fell approximately 65 feet, impacting the rushing creek below with tremendous force. The frigid water, moving fast with spring runoff, was roughly 4 feet deep where she landed. The impact stunned her, and her heavy pack immediately pulled her under. The current swept her downstream toward the deeper pool. She surfaced once, gasping, but couldn't gain purchase on the slick creek bed. The water was 38 degrees Fahrenheit, inducing immediate cold shock and rapidly impairing her muscle control. She went under again, tumbling over submerged rocks. Her crampons snagged on something underwater. Pulling her face down, she inhaled reflexively, filling her lungs, and the current carried her into the deeper pool where she did not resurface. A solo hiker approaching on the trail heard the ice collapse and arrived at the base of the waterfall within minutes. He spotted Nola's body floating face down in the pool and immediately called for help. Responders arrived within 30 minutes, but she showed no signs of life when pulled from the water. Her camera, recovered from a waterproof pocket, showed photos taken at 6:52 a.m. from the base of the route. The ice screws she had placed were found still clipped to the rope, with the ice threading pulled cleanly through, evidence of the rotten ice's inability to hold under load. The collapsed ice section lay shattered at the base of the waterfall. Examination determined drowning as the cause of death, with cold water immersion as a significant contributing factor. Additional injuries included a dislocated shoulder, fractured collarbone, and severe bruising across her back and ribs from the impact, though none were individually fatal. Her core temperature at recovery was 52 degrees Fahrenheit. The investigation documented that she had bypassed closure signs and ignored posted warnings about unstable ice conditions. Her death was ruled accidental, noting that the closures existed specifically to prevent incidents like hers. It was May 23rd, 2017. The upper mountain above Camp 4 on Everest's southeast ridge sits fully exposed to the jet stream, a band of high-altitude wind that shifts north of the summit in late May, opening the narrow windows that make summit attempts possible. Those windows had been running shorter and less predictable in recent seasons. The forecasting models in use were built on decades of historical data, and by 2017 the mountain was beginning to move outside the patterns that data described. Brian Gill was 41 years old, a backcountry ski guide from Missoula, Montana. His job was reading avalanche terrain, managing clients in whiteout conditions, making fast calls in environments that punish hesitation. Mountain weather wasn't abstract to him. It was his livelihood. Everest had been a personal goal he'd been building towards since his early 30s. He'd summited Denali and Aconcagua in prior years and approached this the same way he approached everything, methodically. Full acclimatization rotation, reputable guiding service, every decision made by the book. His forecasting service confirmed a stable window from May 24th through May 27th, winds under 20 miles per hour at the summit. The window held exactly as predicted on May 24th. Conditions stable, wind low, nothing to suggest the model was off. He launched his summit push from Camp 4 at 11 p.m. that night, with every reason to trust the forecast. By 3 a.m., he was above 27,500 feet and moving well within his projected pace. The wind picked up slightly around 4:30 a.m., but stayed within acceptable range. He reached the south summit at approximately 6:15 a.m. and continued toward the true summit, clearing it at around 7 a.m. The sky was clear. He turned around immediately and began his descent. Shortly after beginning his descent, The wind arrived. The jet stream drops back onto the summit ridge from the west, and when it does, there's no gradual build. It hits. By 7:15 a.m., winds on the ridge had climbed past 45 miles per hour. By 7:30 a.m., they were above 60 miles per hour, with gusts exceeding 70. At that altitude, wind that strong drives ice crystals horizontally, cuts visibility to almost nothing, and makes every movement a negotiation. The temperature dropped sharply. Bryle was on the ridge, just below the summit, when the full force of it arrived. There is no position on that section of the ridge where you can wait anything out. You move, or the mountain decides for you. His guide called the turn and pushed the descent hard, but getting a client down from that position in those conditions, above 28,000 feet, at the edge of their physical capacity, isn't a controlled descent. It's a managed deterioration. Bryle kept moving, but his guide noticed his response time to verbal instructions was increasing, a beat too slow, then two. His posture was dropping, his movements losing their precision in a way that had nothing to do with the terrain. His body was losing heat faster than it could generate it, and the wind wasn't letting up. He stopped on the fixed rope above the balcony at approximately 9:40 a.m. at around 27,600 feet. His guide tried to keep him upright and moving. It wasn't working. Bryle was still breathing, but unresponsive to instruction. A distress call went out from the guide's radio at approximately 10 a.m. A rescue team departed Camp 4 at around 10:30 a.m. His guide stayed until staying was no longer viable without putting himself at the same risk, then descended to meet the team and lead them back up. They reached Bryle's position at approximately 1:30 p.m. and found him still clipped to the fixed rope, unresponsive, no signs of life. His body was recovered 2 days later during a weather break, still on the fixed rope above the balcony. His down suit showed no damage. His oxygen system was intact. His GPS logged his last movement at approximately 10:15 a.m. The post-expedition report noted he had done everything correctly: acclimatization, pacing, turnaround call, equipment. Cause of death was recorded as hypothermia secondary to acute wind exposure at high altitude. Contributing factors listed were rapid jet stream repositioning, approximately 6 hours ahead of any projected timeline, sustained wind speeds exceeding 60 miles per hour above 28,000 feet, and no viable descent route fast enough to outpace the deteriorating conditions. The forecasting service acknowledged in their internal review that the model had failed to capture the repositioning event within any actionable warning window. Bryle's GPS data, oxygen equipment, and guide testimony were the primary evidence on record. Bryle's case sits in a different category from the others. He didn't make a bad decision. He didn't bypass a rule or ignore a warning. He trusted a forecasting system that failed to capture what the mountain actually did that morning, 6 hours outside any projected window. His case doesn't point to a permit gap or an enforcement failure. It points to the outer edge of what any framework can actually control, and that's the part that stays with you. It was April 19th, 2017, and the air at Everest Base Camp carried the metallic edge of snow that had melted and refrozen overnight. The temperature sat around 24 degrees Fahrenheit, with gusts pushing through the Khumbu Glacier, strong enough to rattle tent poles and send loose equipment skidding across ice. Prayer flags strung between expedition clusters snapped in bursts, their frayed edges worn thin by seasons of wind and ultraviolet light. The camp was deep into its rhythm. Teams had been on the mountain for weeks, and the icefall doctors had established and maintained the route through the Khumbu since early April. Lauren Shale arrived 3 weeks late. She was 41 years old, a corporate consultant from Denver who had rebranded herself as an adventure athlete after guided trips up Kilimanjaro and a partial ascent of Elbrus. 2 expedition companies had rejected her Everest application for insufficient experience. A third, a budget operator in Kathmandu with a reputation for flexibility, declined at first, but reversed the decision after Lauren wired an additional payment to the owner's personal account. The operator reassigned an unused permit from a canceled client and added Lauren to the roster mid-season. The field team was never told. When Lauren showed up at base camp, the expedition leader didn't recognize her. The client manifest listed 7 climbers. Lauren made 8. She produced paperwork showing the Kathmandu office had added her, and a phone call to the operator produced vague confirmation the money had already been accepted. Lakpa Rangdu, the expedition's lead Sherpa, 36 years old with 9 Everest summits, saw the problem right away. Oxygen allocations, tent assignments, food rations, and Sherpa pairings had all been calculated for 7. Adding an 8th without adjustments meant someone would come up short when it mattered. That's what gets me every time with these stories. The guy with 9 summits flags the problem on day 1, and the answer is basically, figure it out. The first acclimatization rotation through the Khumbu icefall exposed Lauren completely. She clipped her ascender backward twice. She froze on a ladder crossing until a line of climbers stacked up behind her. Her crampon technique alternated between flat footing, where she should have been front pointing, and dragging her feet in ways that snagged the rope. Lakpa corrected her patiently at first, then firmly, then with visible concern. Other clients on the rotation started requesting different group assignments. Nobody wanted to be roped to someone who couldn't keep pace, and the resentment was building quietly across the team. When Lakpa brought it to the expedition leader, Lauren was standing right there and jumped in, insisting her performance was normal for a first rotation. She name-dropped routes in Patagonia and a winter Denali attempt. A client who had actually climbed the Patagonian route later told the guide team that Lauren's descriptions didn't match the terrain. And look, I've seen climbers stretch their resumes before. Everyone adds a little polish. But making up entire routes you've never set foot on while standing next to people who have, that's a different level. The second rotation to Camp 2 at 21,000 feet confirmed everything. Lauren stumbled on flat glacier terrain, burned through water at twice the rate of other clients, and needed rest stops that pushed the group 2 hours behind. The third rotation reached only 22,800 feet, well short of Camp 3 at 23,500. Lauren couldn't hold front point technique on steep ice. Lakpa had to physically guide her boots into placements. They turned back. Lauren had never acclimatized above 23,000 feet. When the summit window opened, the expedition leader barred Lauren from the push. Her response was controlled, but threatening. She would contact the Kathmandu operator, have the guide replaced, and pursue legal action for services not rendered. She appeared to accept the decision. She did not. Lauren tagged along with another team's rope line during the afternoon, pushed to the South Col. In the crowding and wind, Sherpas assumed she belonged to a neighboring expedition. That night, Lakpa found her on the fixed ropes at 27,000 feet, climbing alone in the dark with no Sherpa assigned. Base camp radioed to turn her around, but pulling someone off a fixed rope who won't cooperate at that altitude risks both lives. Lauren refused to go down. They found her body the following afternoon at around 27,800 feet, seated against a rock band above the balcony. Her oxygen mask hung around her neck. Her hands were bare. Her eyes were open. She had never acclimatized above 23,000 feet, and cerebral edema had done what it always does to unprepared bodies. She was 41 years old. The bare hands are the detail I keep coming back to. Severe haste destroys judgment so completely that climbers stop protecting themselves from the cold. The brain can't process danger anymore. She was freezing to death and didn't have the awareness left to care. The Kathmandu operator faced investigation. 2 legitimate clients on the expedition failed to summit because Lauren's presence had thrown off the rotation schedule and squeezed their acclimatization windows. It was February 11th, 2016, on the south side of Mount Hood in Oregon. The mountain looked calm from the trailhead, its upper slopes washed in pale winter light. Snow conditions had hardened overnight, and the established route was quiet after recent storms. Rangers had posted seasonal closure notices along exposed sections. Warnings meant to slow people down, not stop them completely. Caleb Morris was 35, an information technology contractor from Vancouver, Washington, who spent most weekends hiking in the Cascades. He was methodical in summer and confident on well-worn trails, known among friends for moving quickly and packing light. Winter travel was newer to him, but he believed experience translated across seasons if the gear was right. He had no sponsors, no public profile, and no pressure beyond wanting to be home by evening. His equipment that day included stiff boots, steel crampons, trekking poles, and a light pack. He carried no ice axe and had not taken formal winter travel training. The south side route in winter follows gentle switchbacks designed to avoid icy fall lines, leaving them exposed as climbers to hard snow, angled toward volcanic rock. Crampons help with traction, but they do not stop a fall once momentum builds. Caleb began early and made steady progress. As the slope steepened, he noticed his GPS showed a shorter line cutting across the switchbacks. He knew that traverse was discouraged in winter, but it looked efficient and tracked from earlier seasons. The snow surface appeared firm and uniform, without visible ice. He stepped off the marked route, committing to the shortcut. The slab was harder than expected. Each step rang faintly as metal bit into frozen snow. He angled across, leaning slightly uphill, aware that a slip would carry him downslope. Halfway across, his right crampon caught abruptly. The point snagged beneath the surface, twisting his leg as his upper body continued moving. The sound of the femur snapping was sharp and unmistakable. Caleb collapsed instantly, his leg folding beneath him. Pain overwhelmed any attempt to self-arrest. His body slid, rotating as gravity took control. He struck the first boulder hip first, then spun, hitting shoulders and head against exposed rock. Two climbers above watched the slide unfold in seconds. They shouted and tried to move, but the slope below them was equally icy and unsafe. Caleb continued downward, bouncing between rocks before coming to rest against a snowbank. There was no movement afterward. The climbers called emergency services within minutes. Mountain rescue was dispatched, but reaching the site required securing the slope and approaching from below. Rescuers arrived approximately 40 minutes later. Caleb had already succumbed to his injuries, with extensive blood loss visible in the snow. The medical examination later found a compound fracture of the right femur, crushed pelvic bones, and severe internal bleeding. The force of the impacts ruptured major blood vessels and organs. Death occurred within seconds of the initial fall before help could physically reach him. Recovery teams documented his GPS track, which clearly showed the illegal traverse cutting across the closed slope. No equipment failure or weather anomaly was identified. Conditions matched the posted warnings exactly. The incident was recorded as a fatal winter hiking accident involving route deviation. Additional warning signage was installed the following season, emphasizing fall hazards and seasonal closures. The danger wasn't dramatic. It was a shortcut across the ice. It was June 22nd, 2021, along the Angeles Crest Highway, about 40 miles northeast of Los Angeles. The sun was low, casting golden light over the hills and long shadows across the winding road. A cooler breeze rustled through scrub and pine, carrying the faint scent of sage and dust. The highway was quiet, with only a few cars passing and kicking up clouds of dirt that settled slowly on the slope. Isla Marin, 28, slid out, adjusting her camera bag across her shoulder while checking settings on her DSLR. She crouched near the open trunk, flipping through lens caps and filters as Kieran Holt, 30, scrolled through a Reddit post on his phone. Weeks earlier, he had saved a thread promising a hidden viewpoint of Los Angeles from an unusual angle, a perspective that would frame the sprawling city beneath jagged floating rock formations. One comment had warned there was a reason the area was fenced off, but he had dismissed it. They had come for the shot. Isla and Kieran had met 2 years earlier at a workshop in Joshua Tree, bonding over their mutual frustration with social media platforms that rewarded repetition and overdone angles. They had built modest followings by seeking out obscure locations and showcasing them with a distinct creative flair. But recently, engagement had stalled. Everyone was a photographer now, and standing out required something rare, something dangerous even. They spotted the old fire road, a narrow, overgrown track littered with loose rocks and scrub. A chain-link fence blocked the path, covered with signs warning of unstable terrain and prohibiting trespassing. Kieran tested it, taut and unyielding, with no gaps. At the car, he pulled a small toolkit and carefully cut a section, just wide enough to slip through while Isla kept watch. Once inside, the fire road stretched ahead, uneven and littered with sage and buckwheat. The sun was sinking, and they had little time for photography. The hike proved steeper than expected, with loose granite and erosion forcing Isla onto hands and knees at times. Kieran checked the Reddit directions, but the vague descriptions left them uncertain at every turn. Branches and scrub tore at their sleeves as they climbed. After 20 minutes, they crested a ridge. The viewpoint emerged, a rock formation jutting outward like a natural balcony, offering a commanding view of Los Angeles below. Streets, buildings, and the face of the Pacific Ocean stretched to the horizon, framed by jagged rocks. The scene was breathtaking, but every boulder was unstable, hollowed by erosion and precariously balanced. Isla moved cautiously, tripod in hand, testing each step. Kieran advanced for handheld shots, capturing multiple angles as the sun shifted from gold to pink, casting long shadows over the jagged rocks. The view was breathtaking, but danger lurked with every step. The rock beneath her right foot produced a faint grinding sound. Investigators later concluded that a large boulder on the edge had been undermined over time by erosion and freeze-thaw cycles. A small shift in weight was enough to destabilize it. The boulder began to roll, slowly at first. Then with increasing momentum, Isla lunged backward, scrambling for stable ground, fingers scraping rock and dirt. Kieran shouted, lunging toward her, but the slope and distance kept him out of reach. She tumbled over loose rock and scrub, hitting a larger boulder with a sickening crack, then sliding another 20 feet into a tangle of manzanita bushes. Smaller rocks cascaded after her, a chain reaction down the mountainside. Kieran descended carefully, every step a hazard, hands cutting themselves on branches and sharp rock edges. Adrenaline surged as he neared her. Isla was conscious but pale, breathing shallow and rapid. Her left leg bent unnaturally. She moaned, signaling internal injuries. Kieran's mind raced. Any wrong move could trigger more rock slides, but leaving her alone wasn't an option. He climbed to higher ground for a signal. With trembling hands, he dialed 911, explaining the unstable terrain and her injuries. Rescue took 4 hours. Paramedics had to rappel down to her, while Kieran guided them from above, shouting instructions to keep her calm. Darkness fell over the mountains as they prepared to evacuate her. Isla died during surgery from massive internal injuries. 28 years old. The investigation documented the cut fence, the illegal trespass, and ignored warnings. The medical examiner ruled her death accidental, while Kieran was cited for trespassing and destruction of county property, but faced no criminal charges. Beyond the jagged rocks and city views, Winter Mountains waited silently, ready to challenge anyone who ignored the warnings. It was November 14th, 2015. Mount Whitney's eastern approach had been officially closed for the season due to early snowpack and dangerous ice conditions above 12,000 feet. Posted barriers and caution tape blocked the trailhead, with printed notices warning of fines and serious alpine hazards. Theo Brannick was 31, a software technician from Sacramento with moderate hiking experience but limited winter mountaineering skills. He was known among friends for impatience with rules he considered excessive. Theo had attempted Whitney twice before during illegal seasons, but turned back both times due to altitude sickness. This trip was a spontaneous weekend decision to finally summit before winter fully locked in. He'd bragged to co-workers that closures were just liability protection. Mount Whitney's eastern approach gains over 6,000 feet across miles of exposed alpine terrain, becoming barren and featureless under snow well before the summit. In mid-November, temperatures routinely drop well below freezing overnight, with a wind chill pushing conditions to life-threatening extremes within hours. The trail disappears entirely under heavy snowpack, and navigation without intimate familiarity with the terrain is exceptionally difficult, even with GPS. Theo bypassed the closure barriers around 4:30 p.m., just as the last daylight was fading. He'd ignored repeated online warnings about the trail conditions and early sunset. A ranger vehicle had been parked near the trailhead earlier that day, but Theo waited until it left to begin his ascent. The trail was snow-covered within the first mile, and his running shoes offered no traction on ice patches. By 6 p.m., full darkness had settled, and his headlamp beam barely penetrated the swirling snow. Theo continued upward, confident he could identify the route from summer photos he'd studied. At roughly 10,200 feet, After nearly 4 hours of slow climbing, he reached an area where snow had completely obscured the trail. Multiple drainage paths branched off in different directions. He chose what appeared to be the main path based on instinct. It was the wrong direction. By 9 p.m., Theo realized he'd been climbing into a side drainage instead of following the main trail. His GPS app showed he was nearly a mile off route, heading into unmapped terrain. He attempted to backtrack, but his footprints had been filled in by fresh snow. The temperature had dropped to 5 degrees Fahrenheit, and wind gusts reached 35 miles per hour. His light jacket, soaked from brushing against snow-laden branches, and from sweat, stopped providing insulation. He began shivering violently. Theo tried to call for help, but his phone showed no signal. Around 9:45 p.m., his headlamp began dimming noticeably. The combination of cheap batteries and extreme cold was draining them faster than normal. He tried replacing them with his spare set, but his fingers were already numb and clumsy. He dropped one battery in the snow and couldn't find it in the darkness. In the weakening light, he stumbled forward, hoping to find the main trail. Instead, he tripped over a concealed rock and twisted his ankle severely. The pain made walking nearly impossible. His headlamp died completely around 10:30 p.m. In total darkness, he crawled beneath a cluster of stunted pines and curled into a ball, trying to preserve warmth. His core temperature began dropping rapidly. Shivering stopped after an hour, a sign his body was shutting down. He lost consciousness around midnight. The snowfall continued through the night, covering his position completely. Theo's absence wasn't reported until Monday afternoon, when his roommate realized he hadn't returned from what was supposed to be a day hike. His car was found at the closed trailhead Tuesday morning. A search team deployed Tuesday afternoon, following standard grid patterns from the official trail. They found his body Thursday afternoon, roughly 700 feet below and northeast of where the main trail should have been. At that elevation, partially buried under 8 inches of new snow. The medical examiner determined Theo died from severe hypothermia, with contributing factors including exhaustion, dehydration, and a sprained ankle that immobilized him. His core body temperature had likely dropped below 85 degrees Fahrenheit within 2 hours of becoming stationary. Time of death was estimated between midnight and 2 a.m. on November the 15th. Evidence recovered included his phone with logged attempts to access GPS between 8:45 p.m. and 9:30 p.m., all showing him progressively farther from the maintained trail. His pack contained no emergency bivvy, inadequate spare batteries, and no insulated layers. The case was ruled accidental death due to exposure. Investigators noted that Theo had willfully bypassed multiple closure barriers and ignored clearly posted warnings about life-threatening conditions. It was April 14th, 2017. The Khumbu Icefall begins just above base camp at roughly 17,600 feet on Everest's southwest face. A slow-moving river of glacial ice broken into towers and walls called seracs, some of them the size of multi-story buildings, all of them shifting and settling on their own schedule. Permitted teams are assigned specific crossing windows, typically between 3 a.m. and 7 a.m., time to avoid the warmer mid-morning hours when melt accelerates serac instability. Even within those windows, teams move fast and don't linger. Oscar Duell was 31 years old, an offshore oil rig worker from Boise, Idaho. Physical risk wasn't foreign to him. Rig work builds that tolerance fast. He was fit, strong, and used to operating in environments that could kill you if you made the wrong call. That probably worked against him here. He had 2 Himalayan treks behind him, neither above 20,000 feet, and had applied for an Everest permit the previous year. Rejected. Insufficient documented high-altitude experience under a review process that was tightening every season. To requalify, he would have needed at least one documented summit above 21,000 feet, which meant another expedition, another season, another year. Most people would go back, build the resume, reapply. Oscar didn't. He told one friend he was heading out on a high-altitude photography trip, packed his gear, and showed up at base camp with no guide, no support team, and no registered itinerary with any operator on the mountain. The icefall isn't a static obstacle. It's a moving one. The glacier creeps downhill continuously, and the pressure that creates causes collapses nobody can predict. Route fixing teams maintain a system of ladders and fixed ropes through the safest available path, updated regularly as the ice shifts. That information doesn't circulate outside permitted teams. Someone going in alone has no way of knowing where the current safe line actually runs. They're navigating blind. Oscar entered the icefall alone at approximately 2 a.m. outside the permitted window, hours before the route fixing teams would be active. He was carrying a full pack with a tent, food, and camera gear, for enough to suggest he was planning to push above the icefall and camp without being detected. No other headlamps were in the icefall that morning. No teams, no Sherpas, nobody near him, just Oscar and the ice. His GPS data shows he had studied the route. He was moving with purpose, but he had no way of knowing whether the path he was following matched the current safe line. At around 3:20 a.m., a Serac cluster in the upper icefall collapsed. There's no slow build with these things. No cracking, no warning. One moment the ice is there, the next it isn't. The debris field that came down covered an estimated 300-foot section of the route, burying everything beneath several meters of fractured ice. People at base camp heard it. A deep, concussive sound, followed by a low rumble. Nobody went to check. Serac collapses happen regularly, and the standard response is to assess during the morning window. There was no reason to connect that sound to a person. Nobody knew Oscar was out there. When the first permitted teams entered the icefall at around 4:30 a.m., they found a section of the fixed rope route buried under fresh ice debris. A crampon and part of a backpack frame were visible at the edge of the field. The teams marked the location and reported it upon return to base camp. 5 days later, the friend Oscar had told about the trip contacted the trekking agency Oscar had used to arrange his base camp access. After receiving no communication, the agency flagged it to operators on the mountain, who cross-referenced it against the debris field discovery and initiated a search. It ran for 2 days. The debris field was too deep and structurally unstable to excavate safely. Any attempt risked triggering further collapse. Oscar's body was never recovered. His pack, one crampon, a handheld GPS unit, and his camera were pulled from the surface. The GPS placed his last recorded position at 3:18 a.m., roughly 200 feet into the Serac field. The final image on his camera, time-stamped 3:09 a.m., showed the interior of the icefall angled upward toward a leaning Serac tower. His name was on no permit, no expedition manifest, no operator log. Cause of death was recorded as traumatic compression and burial, consistent with Serac collapse. Contributing factors included unsupported solo entry, no registered communication device, and movement through an active Serac zone during high-risk pre-dawn hours without current route information. The case was closed as an unregistered fatality. The GPS data and recovered camera were the only evidence on record. His body was never retrieved. His name was on no permit, no manifest, no operator log, and that was the problem. A rejected permit meant nothing if someone determined enough could arrange base camp access through a trekking agency and walk in before anyone knew they were there. The 2026 framework's tighter base camp verification requirements and mandatory operator accountability exist because Oscar's case proved the gap was real and the consequences were permanent. It was May 18th, 2013, and the Lhasa face gleamed under mid-morning sun like polished blue glass. Fixed ropes running up the face were packed with climbers from multiple teams, each moving at their own pace while Sherpas threaded between them, hauling loads. Nicola Pryor was 39, from London, stuck behind a climber who stopped every 15 steps. Her budget expedition ran large groups with barely any Sherpa support, and the pace was set by the slowest person on the team. Nicola was fitter than all of them, and the frustration had been building since the first rotation. She had noticed the faster expedition days earlier. Efficient clients, more oxygen, better gear. On summit push day, she left Camp 3 early and fell in behind the faster group. She clipped onto their rope and slotted herself into their line like she belonged. Kanchanuru, the faster expedition's lead Sherpa, 40 with 12 Everest summits, spotted her at a rest stop around 24,800 feet. He checked with his expedition leader by radio. She wasn't on the manifest. His expedition had contributed to the shared route-fixing effort above Camp 3. The oxygen at Camp 4 was set aside for his clients. Her being there threw off the safety math he was running. Nicola accused him of harassment, told him she'd report him if he kept going. I need to be honest, when I got to this part I had to read it again. She's outside any logistics chain, using oxygen she didn't pay for, with no rescue plan if anything goes wrong, and when the lead Sherpa asks her to leave, she threatens to report him. The audacity is hard to overstate. Kancha made a call. He left her, moved his clients forward, radioed her expedition company, and focused on the people he was actually responsible for. Nicola kept going alone, drifting behind teams she didn't belong to, resting when they rested, moving when they moved. Two Sherpas from different expeditions later said they saw her take an oxygen bottle from a cache at Camp 4 that was clearly labeled for another team. I want you to think about that. That bottle was carried to 26,000 feet on someone's back, cached for a client who might need it to survive the descent. And she just grabs it. She ducked into an empty tent on the South Col and rested before the summit push. Using shelter she hadn't arranged and fuel she hadn't paid for, she left for the summit that night, following headlamps in the dark, carrying one oxygen bottle with no spare and no Sherpa keeping track of her. She reached the balcony at 27,600 feet behind the main groups, already hours deep into her single bottle supply. Above the balcony, the math turned fatal. At the flow rate she was using, her single bottle was nearing depletion. The summit was still 1,400 vertical feet above. No spare, no Sherpa carrying extra supply, and nobody on the mountain tracking where she was. Nicola Pryor was found at around 28,200 feet, slumped against the fixed rope. Climbers coming down from the summit first assumed she was resting. A Sherpa who checked on her 2 hours later found no pulse. She was 39 years old. Nobody on the entire mountain was tracking her. I keep landing on that because it's the thing that makes budget expeditions so dangerous. She walked away from the only people responsible for her, and nothing existed to catch her before the mountain did. Kanchanuru was questioned about leaving her on the rope. Sherpa teams across the mountain backed his decision without exception. He had protected the clients in his care. Budget operators had been a growing problem on Everest for years. They undercut established companies by stripping services to the minimum. Smaller Sherpa teams, fewer oxygen bottles, less communication gear, and almost no oversight once clients left base camp. For climbers who couldn't afford premium expeditions, they were the only option. But the trade-off was simple. You paid less, got less, and when something went wrong above 26,000 feet, nobody was coming. Nicola's expedition couldn't even confirm she was missing until other teams reported it. It was September 14th, 2014, on the Via Ferrata Ivano di Bona, above Cortina d'Ampezzo in Italy's Dolomites. The route was officially closed for maintenance quite after sunset, with warning signs left unread and steel cables waiting to be replaced. Nothing about the evening suggested drama. It was simply dark, damp, and unattended, the kind of setting where small decisions go unnoticed until they cannot be reversed. Marco Bellini was 41, a seasonal construction laborer who worked summers on renovation crews and winters where he could find them. When tourist season slowed, he scavenged scrap metal to bridge the gap between contracts, a practice common enough in the region to feel routine. Friends described him as practical and unromantic, someone who trusted familiarity more than planning. He had grown up around the mountains and had used Via Ferratas since his 20s, enough to believe he understood their risks without formal instruction. His equipment that night reflected that mindset. Marco carried bolt cutters, work gloves, and a short static rope meant for positioning, not arresting a fall. He wore approach shoes rather than boots and relied on a simple personal tether instead of a certified Via Ferrata lanyard with energy absorbers. The Ivano di Bona route is a traversing line of exposed ledges and vertical steps cut into pale limestone, normally protected by a continuous steel cable. Marco entered the route after dark to avoid hikers and maintenance crews. He ignored posted notices, stating the line was unsafe and assumed the exposure would be manageable if he moved slowly. The weather forecast called for clear skies but high humidity, and dew had already begun to settle on the shaded rock. He progressed to a long, horizontal section and began cutting the cable into manageable lengths, coiling it against his chest. In the final section, he attempted to move past a gap where the cable had been removed entirely. A temporary pedon had been placed nearby for workers, not for fall protection. Marco unclipped his tether, reached for the python, and tried to reclip while standing on a sloping ledge. Below him, the route dropped in step terraces toward a scree field, hundreds of feet down. His right boot skated on polished limestone, slick with dew. Without the cable in place, there was nothing to check the slip. His body pitched forward, his hands clawing at the empty air, the rope never loading. He struck the first ledge feet first, then rotated, hitting his side and head. The fall continued, uncontrolled, bouncing and tumbling across multiple shelves. Each impact produced a dull report that carried through the valley before stopping abruptly. Two climbers below heard several impacts in quick succession, then silence. They used headlamps to scan the face and saw debris falling, but no movement. One climber descended to a safe point and called emergency services at 9:42 p.m., reporting a fall from the Ferrata. Mountain rescue arrived just over an hour later, reaching the body after midnight when conditions allowed. The post-mortem examination found catastrophic head injuries, a crushed rib cage, collapsed lungs, and widespread internal bleeding. The spine was broken at multiple levels, and death occurred on the first major impact. No equipment malfunction or external interference was identified beyond his own actions that night alone there. During daylight recovery, maintenance workers noticed a long section of cable missing and cut cleanly. Investigators traced recent scrap metal sales to Marco's vehicle, parked near the trailhead. The route reopened months later with reinforced anchors and theft-resistant fittings installed along the line. The danger wasn't dramatic. It was routine theft on a familiar path. It was March 14th, 2019, at the base of Mount Schiavano in Colorado, a 14,231-foot peak, glowing in early morning light. Snowfields were tinted gold and pink, and the air was cold enough to numb fingers quickly. Thin frost covered the trailhead rocks, while a few climbers prepared their packs and tightened crampons. Wind slid down from the summit, tugging at jackets and rattling loose gravel near the parking area. Dakota Brennan, 26, stood near the first trail marker with his phone set up against a rock, its screen already recording. He had climbed several Colorado 14ers before, but most of his recent experience came from social media challenges and viral outdoor trends. He pulled off his hiking boots and peeled away his socks, flexing his bare toes against the frozen ground while grinning at the camera. His plan was simple and risky: to take part in the Barefoot Summit Challenge, a trend where climbers attempted to reach summits without footwear. He was confident, excited, and focused on the video, far less accustomed to mountain cold than to chasing views and reactions. What Dakota's followers didn't know was that Mount Schiavano's standard route was officially closed for the season. Avalanche danger sat at considerable levels, and the Forest Service had posted multiple warnings. Dakota had found a forum post describing an alternate approach through private property that bypassed the closures, though the instructions were outdated and barely detailed. Red flags he chose to interpret as green lights. He'd been building his outdoor adventure channel for 2 years, posting weekly content about hiking, camping, and increasingly risky challenges. Engagement had plateaued around 45,000 subscribers for months, and other creators were pulling ahead with more extreme content. The Barefoot Summit Challenge felt like his ticket back into relevance. Several smaller channels had already blown up after posting their attempts. The first mile felt almost pleasant, cutting through dense pine forest where years of fallen needles created a soft carpet beneath his feet. Dakota filmed himself walking, talking to the camera about embracing discomfort, about pushing boundaries, about how society had made everyone too dependent on gear. His feet were cold, but manageable. Uncomfortable, yes, but expected. By mile 2, the forest thinned, and the terrain shifted to exposed rock and patches of old snow. Dakota's pace slowed as his feet searched for flat stones, avoiding sharp edges. Temperature dropped with elevation, and his toes had gone from cold to numb. He stopped to film an update, panning the view behind him, forcing enthusiasm into his voice, hiding the growing worry in his mind. His toes had taken on a waxy pale appearance, but he was barely a third of the way up. Turning back now meant failure, wasted time, effort, and content. The climb followed a steep ridge where wind-scoured rock alternated with hard-packed snow, cuts from sharp stones now mixed with numbness, bleeding across his feet without him feeling it. His pace slowed to a crawl, and the wind carried a bite that seemed to target his exposed feet. He stopped again to film, hands shaking, insisting to the camera that the challenge and the views were worth it, even as confidence slipped. At 13,000 feet, the frostbite had progressed, and hypothermia began creeping in. Thinking grew fuzzy, movements clumsy, stumbles more frequent. The summit was visible, a white dome against the deep blue sky, maybe 45 minutes away under normal conditions. But for Dakota, it might as well have been on another planet. His satellite communicator buzzed with a message from his girlfriend. He struggled with the buttons, unable to respond. The final approach followed a narrow ridge with steep drops. In March, with snow patches and ice, and feet that no longer functioned, it became a gauntlet. He wasn't filming anymore. The camera hung in his hand, recording only bloody footprints in the snow. He made it another 200 vertical feet before his body stopped cooperating. Legs failed, feet slipped, and he collapsed repeatedly. Crawling forward on hands and knees, dragging his useless feet, he left smears of blood on the snow before collapsing face first. The cold now felt almost warm, a sign of severe hypothermia. His body prioritized core survival, abandoning extremities. He rolled onto his back, finally reaching for his communicator, but his fingers refused to cooperate. A hiker found Dakota's body 3 days later, buried beneath fresh snow. Search and rescue estimated he had been dead for more than 2 days. His camera had died, and the SOS function on his satellite communicator remained unused. The medical examiner later listed the cause of death as hypothermia and exposure, with severe frostbite contributing. The Forest Service documented the closure violations and illegal access route, but took no further action. It was July 9, 2017. Climbing routes at Red Rock Canyon in Nevada had been closed due to an excessive heat warning, with forecasted temperatures exceeding 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Access gates were locked, and posted signs warned that dark sandstone walls would exceed 150 degrees Fahrenheit under direct sun, making climbing extremely dangerous. Reed Castleberry was 34, a financial analyst from Denver with 3 years of sport climbing experience, mostly at indoor gyms and a few single-pitch outdoor routes in cooler Colorado conditions. He had never climbed in desert heat, but was visiting Las Vegas for a work conference and saw the trip as an opportunity to tick a classic desert route. Despite the closure, he bypassed the warnings and planned to climb Crimson Chrysalis, a popular 5.8 multi-pitch route with 6 pitches totaling roughly 600 feet. He planned to start at 9 a.m. and finish by noon, bringing 2 1-liter water bottles, minimal gear, and wearing a dark-colored synthetic shirt and climbing pants. Desert sandstone absorbs and radiates intense heat during summer months. Surface temperatures on dark rock can exceed 150 degrees Fahrenheit under direct sun, making handholds painful to touch and causing ropes to become dangerously soft. At elevations above 4,000 feet with no shade, climbers are exposed to both direct solar radiation and reflected heat from the wall. The human body can lose over a quart of water per hour through perspiration in extreme heat, and dehydration rapidly impairs judgment, coordination, and the body's ability to regulate core temperature. Multi-pitch climbing requires sustained exertion over hours, exponentially increasing heat stress risk. Reed bypassed the locked gate around 8:45 a.m. by parking at an overflow area and hiking cross-country to the base of the route. The temperature was already 98 degrees Fahrenheit. He began climbing at 9:20 a.m. after a quick gear check. The first pitch felt manageable, though the rock was already uncomfortably warm to the touch. He reached the first belay station and drank heavily from 1 water bottle before continuing. By the third pitch, completed around 10:30 a.m., the rock surface was scalding. Reed's hands were red and tender from gripping superheated holds. He'd consumed 1 full liter of water and was sweating profusely, his shirt completely soaked. The temperature had climbed to 108 degrees Fahrenheit, and there was zero shade on the wall. He decided to continue upward rather than rappel down, reasoning that he was more than halfway and could descend the backside hiking trail once he topped out. The 4th pitch required sustained handholds on a vertical face fully exposed to the midday sun. Reed's coordination began deteriorating noticeably. His fingers felt clumsy on the holds, and he was breathing heavily despite the moderate grade. Around 11:15 a.m., he reached the 4th belay station and finished his 2nd water bottle. His face was bright red, and his sweating had decreased significantly, a critical warning sign he failed to recognize. On the 5th pitch, Reed's movements became increasingly erratic. He missed an obvious foothold and had to down-climb to reposition. His vision began blurring intermittently. Approximately 450 feet above the ground, he clipped into a bolt and paused. Nausea hit suddenly, and he vomited a small amount of fluid onto the wall. His legs trembled uncontrollably. He attempted to continue climbing but couldn't coordinate his movements. His core temperature had exceeded 104 degrees Fahrenheit. Confusion set in. He looked down and couldn't remember how many pitches he'd completed. He tried to call for help, but his phone was in his pack at the belay station below. Reed's vision tunneled. He clung to the wall, unable to move up or down. His grip weakened. Within minutes, he slumped forward against the rock, held only by his harness clipped to the bolt. His breathing became rapid and shallow, then stopped entirely. 2 climbers spotted Reed's body hanging limply from the bolt around 1 p.m. and called for help. A technical rescue team reached him by 3:30 p.m., but he had been dead for over 2 hours. His body temperature measured at the scene was 107.4 degrees Fahrenheit. Post-mortem findings confirmed death by heat stroke with multi-organ failure. He had consumed only 2 liters of water over nearly 4 hours of strenuous climbing in temperatures exceeding 108 degrees Fahrenheit. Medical analysis indicated he would have required at least 4 to 6 liters. His dark synthetic clothing absorbed heat rather than reflecting it, accelerating his core temperature rise. Investigators confirmed he had bypassed the locked gate and multiple posted warnings explicitly prohibiting climbing due to life-threatening conditions. His death was ruled accidental, with notation that inadequate water and no exit strategy directly caused the fatal outcome. It was May 18, 2017. Camp 3 on Everest's southeast ridge sits at approximately 23,500 feet on the Lhotse face, a near vertical wall of blue ice that connects the western CWM to the upper mountain. At that elevation, the air holds roughly 40% of the oxygen available at sea level. Most teams spend a single night there at most before pushing up or retreating to a lower camp. It is not a place designed for rest. The longer you stay, the more it costs you. Eric Brigg was 34 years old, a travel and adventure photographer based out of Austin, Texas. 5 years of building a following of just over 400,000. Desert crossings, jungle routes, high-altitude passes in the Andes, and the Karakoram. The highest he'd ever been before Everest was 18,510 feet on Island Peak in Nepal. Island Peak is a solid objective, don't get me wrong, but it is nowhere near the preparation Everest actually demands. He wasn't a casual creator, but he was also not a high-altitude climber, and honestly, that gap matters more on Everest than on any other mountain I can think of. Everest was his defining project, a multi-part visual documentary 8 months in the making, sponsors attached, posting schedule locked in. His audience knew his summit push date before he'd even left base camp. So what actually happens to your lungs above 23,000 feet? Fluid builds up, slowly, quietly, as the body struggles to cope with oxygen levels it was never designed for. A dry, persistent cough. Fatigue that doesn't match the effort. Breathlessness at rest. The signs are easy to dismiss individually, but together they mean one thing: get down. Every hour above the onset point without descending narrows the window significantly. Eric's team ran the standard acclimatization rotations before committing to the push. Base camp to Camp 2 and back twice, with a single night at Camp 3 on the second rotation. No symptoms throughout. His guide cleared him. Eric posted about how well his body was handling the altitude. Better than expected, he wrote. Everything through Camp 3 on summit day was unremarkable. The symptoms appeared on his second night at Camp 3. The tent was small and cold, 2 people pressed into a narrow space at 23,500 feet, with the wind working at the fabric walls. The kind of conditions where you notice everything about the person next to you. His climbing partner noted the cough in a later statement. Dry, frequent, worsening through the night. Eric posted from Camp 3 that evening. The caption described the cold, the altitude, the anticipation. He did not mention the cough. The following morning, his pace toward Camp 4 was noticeably slower than the rest of his team. Not exhaustion slow, but the kind of slow that doesn't match the terrain or the conditions. His guide pulled him aside and recommended a rotation back down to Camp 2 for evaluation. Eric dismissed it. He told his guide the symptoms were normal altitude adjustment, that his body was just catching up. He had announced the summit date to his audience 11 days prior, and a retreat, even a temporary one, was not something he was willing to post about. His guide noted the exchange in his post-expedition statement. By the time he reached Camp 4 at 26,000 feet, his breathing was audibly labored. His guide gave a direct instruction to descend that afternoon. Eric asked for 1 night on supplemental oxygen, convinced he could stabilize. What he didn't know, or chose not to acknowledge, was that the cough had already changed. It was no longer dry. His guide recognized what that meant. Fluid was accumulating in his lungs, and supplemental oxygen alone was not going to reverse it. The only thing that reverses it at that stage is descent. He was found unresponsive in his tent at Camp 4 at approximately 5 a.m. the following morning by his climbing partner. His guide attempted resuscitation. It was too late. A distress call was made from Camp 4 at approximately 5:20 a.m. No helicopter evacuation is possible at 26,000 feet. The air is too thin to generate sufficient rotor lift at that altitude. The call was logged, but there was nothing to be done. A Sherpa team coordinated the body recovery from Camp 4. Weather and terrain made the bring down slow. It took 2 days to get Eric from Camp 4 to base camp. His camera, GPS unit, and satellite communicator were retrieved alongside him. The camera had 34 images from Camp 4, the last time stamped at 11:47 p.m. His satellite communicator had 1 unsent draft to his manager, noting a 1-day delay to the summit push. Never sent. His manager had no idea anything was wrong until the distress call came in. The post-expedition medical assessment placed symptom onset at least 36 hours before death, with no descent initiated, despite a direct guide recommendation. Cause of death was recorded as high-altitude pulmonary edema. Contributing factors listed were delayed descent, refusal of guide instruction, and continued ascent to Camp 4 despite deteriorating respiratory condition. The guide's statement, satellite communicator draft, and time-stamped camera images were the primary evidence on record. This was one of several mid-2010s incidents involving sponsored climbers whose external commitments directly influenced their decisions at altitude. The 2026 framework's stricter guide requirements and experience thresholds were shaped in part by cases like his. Incidents where outside pressure overrode judgment at altitude in ways the existing rules had no mechanism to prevent. His guide gave direct instruction. It carried no enforceable weight. That's the gap the framework was written to close. It was April 29, 2016, and the Khumbu icefall groaned in the afternoon heat. At 29 degrees Fahrenheit, meltwater trickling through the glacier was undermining ice structures that cracked and settled all through the night. Above, Syrax tilted at angles that looked like decisions waiting to be made. Vanessa Holt was 36, from Sydney, a former fitness influencer whose follower count had peaked around 85,000 and dropped to about 40,000. Everest was supposed to turn that around, but before leaving Australia, she'd set up a financial backstop. 3 overlapping adventure insurance policies from different providers, each covering evacuation and rescue costs. She believed the overlap would let her recover far more than the rescues actually cost. Her climbing Sherpa was Ang Cheering, 35 8 Everest summits, from Kunde. Known for one thing above all, he was always the first to move when someone needed help. 14 seasons of rescue work at altitude. That instinct was exactly what Vanessa was counting on. The first staged emergency came at Camp 1. Vanessa reported severe abdominal pain. A helicopter was called. She got flown to Kathmandu, examined, and they found nothing wrong. She filed an insurance claim within 48 hours and was back at base camp 3 days later. The second came at Camp 2. She hyperventilated on purpose and put on symptoms that looked like early-stage pulmonary edema. The expedition doctor found no fluid in her lungs but couldn't rule out early HAPE at that altitude. She got evacuated again. Second claim filed. Ong Chiring helped with the Camp 2 response, hauling supplemental oxygen across the glacier to the landing zone, adding wear on his body during an already brutal season. Between evacuations, other Sherpas noticed Vanessa bounced back too fast and showed no leftover symptoms. She came back each time with a readiness that looked more like planning than recovery. Ong Chiring told the expedition leader what he suspected, but the leader had no medical grounds to cut her. And that's the part that really gets under my skin with this one. Everyone suspected. The Sherpa saw it, the expedition leader saw it, the pattern was right there. But you can't definitively prove someone isn't sick at 21,000 feet, so nobody could stop her. She found a gap in the system and ran it 3 times. The third staged emergency was the most dangerous. At Camp 3, 23,500 feet on the Lhotse face, Vanessa took medications that brought on vomiting and a racing heart. At that altitude, the symptoms were impossible to tell apart from severe acute mountain sickness. She called for help. Ong Chiring heard the radio call from above Camp 3, where he was pre-staging oxygen for the summit push. He came down to her within 30 minutes, moving fast over steep ice the way someone does after doing it dozens of times. What he found looked real. Vomiting, racing pulse, flushed skin. He started lowering her on the fixed ropes. During the descent, wind picked up on the exposed face, gusting to 35 miles per hour. The rescue became a real emergency, no matter whether the patient's condition was genuine. Ong Chiring was managing a body on 45-degree ice in worsening weather at 23,000 feet. At around 22,800 feet, the ice anchor he was waiting fractured. The screw pulled through a surface layer weakened by freeze-thaw cycling. Ong Chiring dropped 30 feet before his backup anchor caught. His body slammed into the ice wall, and the force went straight through his lower left leg. Compound fracture. Tibia and fibula both snapped, bone showing through his climbing suit. Bone through the suit. And what kills me is this is a man who was pre-staging oxygen for other people when that radio call came in. He wasn't even supposed to be on that section of the face. He went because that's what he always does. Vanessa still clipped into the lowering system, slid 50 feet before the rope caught her. She slammed into a rock, outcropping at speed. The impact fractured her pelvis, broke ribs, and ruptured something internal. A second rescue team got to them within 2 hours. Ong Chiring, conscious with his leg shattered, talked the arriving Sherpas through the anchor setup, which screws were holding, which ropes were loaded, how to get Vanessa off the face without collapsing what was left. They got Vanessa down to Camp 2 by nightfall. The internal bleeding had been working for hours. Her skin was gray, her pulse weak, her breathing shallow. Conditions wouldn't allow a helicopter until morning. She died in the medical tent at Camp 2 before dawn. She was 36. Her third emergency on Everest was the only real one, and it killed her. The 2 insurance claims she'd already filed triggered a review. Both insurers investigated and denied coverage. The full scope of the fraud came out in the weeks that followed. Ong Chiring went through 3 surgeries in Kathmandu over 6 months. The fracture healed, but the joint damage was permanent. He couldn't climb above base camp anymore. 14 years of being the first to show up when someone needed help, ended by someone who never needed help at all. His family lost more than half their income. Western climbers who knew him put together a fund that covered the surgeries, but couldn't replace what the mountain had given him. A reporter asked him the following year if he was angry at Vanessa Holt. He said anger takes energy he was using for other things. When asked what those things were, he said he was learning to walk on flat ground the way he used to walk on ice. One step at a time, trusting the surface beneath him. I've ended a lot of these videos and moved on, but that answer is one I can't let go of. Learning to walk on flat ground the way he used to walk on ice. 14 years on that mountain, and that's how it ends. 6 climbers, 6 lies, and the people who paid the highest price weren't the ones who told them. It was June 3rd, 2017, on the sea cliffs above Praia da Marinha in southern Portugal. The beach was empty before sunrise, waves breaking quietly against rock that had been reshaped by winter storms. Warning signs marked sections of the cliff as unstable, but in the low light, they blended into stone. The overhang above the water looked unchanged, solid enough to trust until the morning proved otherwise. Tiago Sousa was 27, a barista from Lagoa who split his days between coffee shifts and climbing sessions along the Algarve coast. He was known locally for athletic traverses and risky movements filmed for social media. Growth mattered to him. His following was small but rising, and outdoor brands occasionally reposted his clips, enough attention to suggest momentum without offering real support. He trained consistently but informally, learning moves from friends and online videos rather than instruction. His climbing relied on minimal gear. He preferred movement over protection, working routes close to the ground or above water, where ropes felt unnecessary. The Praia da Marinha cliffs are a mix of sandstone and limestone, shaped by erosion and salt. Holds can appear solid while hiding fractures beneath thin lips. After winter storms, entire sections weaken, which was why authorities had closed the area weeks earlier. That morning, Tiago hopped a barrier before first light. He placed a camera on a tripod among boulders below the overhang, framing the traverse from the side. The plan was a dynamic sequence under the roof, cutting feet loose and swinging across before matching on a chalked edge near the end. The line had been climbed before the closure, and chalk still marked the holds. Conditions were worse than usual. The air was damp, the rock cold, and small grains fell when he brushed holds. A posted notice warned of erosion and recent rockfall, but Tiago did not inspect it closely. He began anyway, committing once both hands left the ground. The first moves went smoothly, body tension holding as expected. As he reached the crux, he loaded the final edge with his right hand. The sandstone lip fractured instantly. A thin plate shored away under his weight, leaving nothing to grip. Tiago swung outward, slammed shoulder first into the wall, and lost control. His body rotated away from the cliff, feet kicking at air before he dropped free. He fell roughly 40 feet, striking jagged limestone blocks at the base. The impact was loud and final. His head and torso took the force, limbs folding unnaturally on contact. Several early beachgoers heard the sound and ran towards the base of the cliff. One person found the camera still recording and Tiago motionless among the rocks. Emergency services were called within minutes. Paramedics arrived in under 15 minutes, but could not intervene. The injuries were catastrophic. The post-mortem later described multiple skull fractures, a ruptured liver, collapsed lungs, and extensive internal bleeding. He died on impact, with no signs of survival after the fall. Investigators reviewed the camera footage, which clearly showed the hold failing under load. There was no equipment malfunction or external interference. The closure notices were documented, and erosion at the breakpoint matched recent weather reports. Local authorities referenced prior minor rock falls in the same sector earlier that spring, consistent with the visible failure pattern captured on video as supporting evidence. The incident was logged as a fatal fall in a restricted area. The footage was secured as evidence and never released publicly. Authorities installed permanent fencing along the approach. The danger was not dramatic. It was one hand on a weakened edge. It was August 3rd, 2022, near Half Dome in Yosemite, on a narrow rocky ledge. Morning sunlight spilled over the granite cliffs, while mist lingered in the forests below. A light breeze stirred dust and loose stones, carrying the scent of pine and wildflowers. The ledge was barely 15 feet wide, with a steep drop stretching hundreds of feet into the valley. Kai Nakamura, 29, stepped onto the narrow rock ledge and set down his backpack. A former marketing analyst, he had quit his office job 18 months earlier to pursue content creation full-time. His outdoor adventure and landscape photography channel had grown steadily, and he had passed the 100,000 subscriber mark. Sponsors were starting to reach out, but Kai needed footage that would stand out online, and Half Dome offered the perfect opportunity. He unpacked his DJI Mavic 3 Pro drone, laid out the controller, and ran through his checklist. GPS locked, battery full, camera settings optimized. Kai had flown this model countless times, but the exposed, unstable ledge demanded constant attention. Operating the drone perfectly would require focus, making him dangerously unaware of the risk beneath his feet. The valley below stretched into green and gold, mist curling around the trees like smoke. Ravens called intermittently, swooping over granite ledges, the sound echoing off the cliffs. Kai glanced at the screen, double-checking camera tilt and exposure, and launched the drone with a gentle push of the joystick. The quadcopter lifted smoothly, its high-pitched whine blending with the wind. Kai guided the drone in a slow arc, capturing Half Dome from every angle, adjusting the camera with precise, deliberate movements. The view was mesmerizing, the towering cliff, the valley below, golden light everywhere. His focus narrowed completely to the drone, ignoring everything else. Unaware, he stepped backward toward the edge. Loose gravel shifted beneath his boots. A gust of wind scattered dust and pebbles, but his eyes never left the screen. Another step, then another. His heel came down on nothing but air. His brain recognized danger too late. Gravity seized him, and his arms flailed instinctively, trying to regain balance. The controller slipped from his hands and clattered against the rock. Kai fell backward off the ledge. His body rotated as he descended, tumbling down the nearly vertical slope. Rocks and dirt scraped his skin, driving dust into his eyes and mouth. He hit a protruding ledge partway down, the impact throwing him into a roll. Pain shot through his back, ribs, and legs. Momentum carried him further down, tumbling over loose stones, sliding uncontrollably. Minutes of tumbling inflicted brutal trauma. Arms and legs twisted. A branch tore his shoulder. Granite scraped his face. The slope blurred around him in a dizzying cascade. He landed on a narrow ledge 200 feet below, with a fractured skull, broken ribs, shattered pelvis, and fatal internal injuries. Above him, the drone hovered briefly before automatically switching to return to home mode. It traced its programmed path back to the outcropping, its camera capturing the empty rock, the controller lying abandoned. It landed imperfectly, propellers spinning down, memory card still recording. The serene valley below contrasted sharply with the chaos that had just unfolded. A hiker discovered the scene around 9 a.m. They found the drone perched neatly on the ledge, the controller nearby, and then looked over the edge to see Kai's crumpled body on the shelf. Emergency services were called immediately. Park rangers rappelled down. Helicopters arrived, but it was clear there was nothing they could do. The injuries were catastrophic and instantaneous. The investigation reconstructed the sequence quickly. The flight log confirmed the location, path, and timing of the drone. The last image captured on the controller showed Half Dome framed perfectly. The scene Kai had been chasing, oblivious to the edge beneath him. Authorities emphasized that drone use was banned in the park not only because of legal restrictions, but because it created dangerous distraction in already hazardous terrain. The medical examiner determined that death occurred almost instantly, primarily from blunt force trauma to the head and chest. Internal injuries were extensive. The drone's memory card preserved the last moments of the outcropping, silent evidence of the fatal distraction. Kai's family later took down his YouTube channel. The footage, the drone, the camera. All that remained was the empty ledge, the soaring granite, and the valley mist. A haunting reminder of how even an experienced adventurer can be undone by focus on perfection and technology while ignoring the simplest hazard, gravity. It was June 22nd, 2016. The limestone cliffs above Red River Gorge in Kentucky had been temporarily restricted due to ongoing rockfall from unstable formations near the upper rim. Saoirse Delmar was 27, a veterinary assistant from Lexington with 4 years of climbing experience, including 2 seasons of regular outdoor climbing at various crags in Kentucky and Tennessee. She'd completed dozens of routes in the 5.8 to 5.10 range with ropes and had led a handful of single-pitch climbs. She considered herself more skilled than she actually was and frequently dismissed safety protocols as overcautious. Saoirse had free soloed twice before, both easy 5.6 routes, and believed she could handle harder grades. She thought the restriction was temporary bureaucracy and that the rock was stable enough for experienced climbers. Her goal was to solo a route called Broken Arrow, a 5.8 climb she'd completed twice before with a rope and belayer. Limestone is notorious for unpredictable fractures, especially after water infiltration weakens the stone's internal structure. Handholds and footholds that seem solid can snap off under body weight. A fall from 150 feet onto talus is almost universally fatal. Impact forces far exceed what the human body can withstand, causing catastrophic internal injuries, skull fractures, and spinal damage. At free fall velocity from that height, the body reaches approximately 65 miles per hour before impact. Saoirse arrived at the gorge around 8 a.m. and immediately noticed the fencing and printed warnings detailing recent rockfall incidents and visible cracks in the upper cliff sections. She walked the perimeter until finding a gap in the barrier near a creek bed, slipping through and hiking the half-mile approach to Broken Arrow's base. Chalk marks from previous climbers were still visible on the lower holds, which reassured her the route was still being climbed. She spent 20 minutes stretching and examining the first 40 feet of the climb, which looked identical to her previous rope descents. What she didn't inspect was the upper section, specifically a hairline crack running vertically through a key ledge at around 150 feet. Saoirse began climbing at 9:15 a.m., moving smoothly through the lower crux sections, her confidence built with each successful move. By 9:40 a.m., Saoirse had reached the ledge, where the route transitioned onto a broad shelf before continuing up a steeper headwall. She stepped onto it with her right foot, transferring her full body weight. The ledge, undermined by the fracture, held for roughly 2 seconds before detaching from the wall. A section of limestone weighing several hundred pounds broke free, tilting outward. Saoirse's foot slipped as the rock gave way, and she lost her grip on the handholds above. She fell backward, arms flailing instinctively for anything to grab. There was nothing. Her body dropped in free fall, tumbling slightly as she accelerated. She impacted the talus 3 seconds later, landing on her back and left side. The sound echoed through the gorge. Her skull fractured on impact. Multiple ribs broke and punctured both lungs, and her spine fractured in 3 places. Death was likely instantaneous, though her heart continued beating weakly for several minutes as blood pooled in her chest cavity. 2 hikers on a nearby trail heard the impact and immediately called for help. Responders reached Saoirse's location within 35 minutes, but she had no pulse and showed no signs of respiration. The detached ledge section was found shattered near her body. The medical examiner's report listed massive blunt force trauma as the primary cause of death, with fatal injuries including basilar skull fracture, bilateral hemothorax from rib penetration, and spinal transection at T7. The broken ledge showed clear evidence of a stress fracture along a vertical plane, formed when heavy spring rainfall saturated the porous limestone and compromised its structural integrity. Photographs documented Saoirse's chalk marks, ascending the face to the precise point where the ledge separated. Investigators recovered her car keys and phone from a small pack at the cliff base, confirming she had climbed entirely alone without informing anyone of her plans or location. The restriction remained active for another 8 months, while additional unstable sections were identified and removed. Her death was classified as accidental, occurring in a clearly marked restricted area that she had deliberately entered by bypassing safety barriers. The fracture that caused the ledge failure had not been visible from below and could only have been detected through close inspection or specialized equipment. It was May 22, 2016. The southeast ridge of Everest sits above 26,000 feet, what climbers call the death zone, and on that particular morning, it was packed. A rare weather window had opened, and somewhere between 150 and 200 climbers were on the same route, moving in the same direction, within the same narrow time frame. From the western CWM below, the line of headlamps threading the ridge in the pre-dawn dark looked almost organized. Up close, it was a bottleneck with no exit. Jareth Collum was 38 years old, a wildland firefighter from Portland, Oregon. His entire career was built around reading dangerous terrain and knowing when to commit and when to back off. So he wasn't walking into this blind. 3 years of preparation, 2 prior Himalayan expeditions, a certified guide for the summit push, and a full acclimatization rotation done properly. Before leaving Camp 4, he set a hard turnaround time of 1 p.m. and told his guide to hold him to it, no exceptions. no matter where they were on the mountain. Do you know what actually happens to your body above 26,000 feet? It's not just exhaustion. Your brain is starved of oxygen, and it starts to show, slowly, quietly, in ways you won't notice until it's already too late. The air up there holds roughly a third of what's available at sea level. Every hour you stay, the deficit compounds. You don't feel yourself slipping. That's the part that makes it dangerous. Jareth's team reached the balcony at around 27,600 feet by 6 a.m. and ran straight into a wall, not a weather wall, a human one. A line of climbers packed onto a ridge barely wide enough for the single file movement, with no room to pass and nowhere to go around. His guide looked for a gap, tried to find a way past the slower groups ahead. There wasn't one. 3 guided teams were barely moving, clients fumbling with fixed rope technique, some stopping entirely to rest in place on the line. An hour passed, then another. By 9 a.m., they had gained less than 400 feet. His 1 p.m. turnaround came and went while he was still below the south summit. His guide called it. Jareth refused. From where he stood, the summit looked close. Deceptively close. What most people don't realize is that the south summit sits at around 28,700 feet and appears to be the top from below, but the true summit is still roughly a quarter mile of exposed ridge beyond it. Jareth could see what looked like the top. He pushed. He summited at around 2:10 p.m. By that point, he had been above 26,000 feet for over 8 hours. The descent started immediately, but the damage from that kind of sustained exposure doesn't announce itself. It builds quietly while you're focused on everything else. On the way down, his guide noticed it before Jareth did. His movements had become slower and less deliberate. Not exhaustion, slow, but something different. A slight lag between instruction and response. His footwork on the fixed rope was losing its precision. His guide stayed close and kept talking to him, trying to keep him engaged. Then somewhere between the south summit and the balcony, Jareth sat down on the fixed rope and stopped. His guide asked him why. He couldn't answer. His supplemental oxygen wasn't depleted. He hadn't fallen. He had simply been up there too long, and his brain was showing it. His guide and a Sherpa, descending nearby, tried to get him moving. They could keep him partially upright, but he couldn't coordinate his legs well enough to make real downward progress. They worked him as far as the top of the Hillary step. It was approaching 4:30 p.m., over 10 hours in the death zone. The step had partially collapsed after the 2015 earthquake and was more of a broken scramble by then. But honestly, there is no way to lower or carry a non-functional climber down that terrain without killing everyone attempting it. His guide stayed with him for as long as conditions allowed, attempting to keep him alert and upright. Jareth was still breathing, but unresponsive to instruction. With daylight fading and temperature dropping rapidly, his guide made the call to descend for a rescue team and left him clipped to the rope. He reached Camp 4 and radioed for assistance at approximately 5:30 p.m. A small team was dispatched back up immediately. By the time they reached his position, Jareth was gone. Jareth's body was recovered from the fixed rope the following morning by a team that had staged at Camp 4 overnight. His GPS device, oxygen regulator, and personal pack were retrieved alongside him. The GPS data logged his position every 15 minutes and showed he had stopped moving entirely at approximately 5:10 p.m. The post-expedition report placed his total time in the death zone at over 10 hours. His guide's testimony confirmed the turnaround time was missed due to cue delays outside their control. Cause of death was recorded as high-altitude cerebral edema. Contributing factors listed were prolonged exposure in the death zone exceeding 10 hours, delayed turnaround resulting from root congestion, and progressive neurological deterioration consistent with sustained hypoxia. No equipment failure was identified. No weather event occurred. The GPS data and guide testimony were the primary evidence on record. Jareth's case became one of the clearest arguments for why headcount on the mountain on any given summit day has to be a controlled number, not a function of how many permits were sold. A queue that nobody built and nobody managed cost him the turnaround window his guide was supposed to hold. The 2026 framework's permit caps and staggered departure windows exist, in part, because of exactly that. It was April 22, 2018, and the trail above La Bouche wound through terrain dotted with memorial cairns, stone pyramids for climbers who never came back. The air at 16,000 feet made conversation tough on the uphills, and the afternoon clouds rolling up the valley brought a damp cold that got into your clothing and stayed. Paige Dunnigan was 52, a petroleum executive from Houston, and she moved slowly at the back of her group. Tall and solid, she carried herself like someone used to. Authority, but altitude was stripping that away. Her breathing ran heavier than the other clients. Her rest stops came more often, and her complexion had a grayish tone that her climbing Sherpa picked up on before anyone else. Furba Concha was 29 with 4 summits, young for that number. He'd grown up in Rolwaling and finished a high-altitude medicine program run by a climbing NGO. The training taught him to read signs that most Sherpas picked up through instinct rather than clinical knowledge. He watched Paige closely from day one. Paige's medical clearance was forged. 2 years earlier, she'd had angioplasty. She was on daily cardiac medication. She had paid a cardiologist in Houston to sign a letter certifying her fit for extreme altitude with no issues. Furba noticed the pills first, every morning, taken in secret from unmarked bottles. On the first rotation, Paige's oxygen saturation dropped lower and bounced back slower than it should have. Her lips went bluish at 19,500 feet. On the second rotation to Camp 2, Furba picked up an irregular pulse, racing, then pausing, then racing again. He reported it. Paige pulled out the cardiologist's letter. The expedition doctor went with the paperwork. Paige found out Furba had raised concerns. She told Furba, right there in front of other Sherpas, that if Furba's interference cost her the summit, she'd make sure Furba never worked for the company again. Paige had connections to the expedition's investors. That kind of threat carried real weight in a community where seasonal work decided whether families got through the winter. This part is hard for me to talk about calmly because the power dynamics are so ugly. A 29-year-old Sherpa catches a legitimate medical red flag, reports it like he's trained to, and gets threatened with career destruction by the patient. And the system lets it happen because Paige has paperwork and connections. Furba stopped filing formal reports. He didn't stop watching. During the third rotation, he saw Paige palming white tablets under her tongue, nitroglycerin for acute cardiac relief. Summit push, May 20th. Paige got to Camp 4, gray-faced, breathing hard even on supplemental oxygen. They left at midnight. She climbed slowly but steadily, reaching the balcony at 27,600 feet, nearly an hour behind the group. Above that, her pace fell off even more. Each step took visible seconds of effort. At around 28,100 feet, Paige pressed her hand to her chest. She doubled over her ice axe. Her breathing became shallow and erratic. She collapsed onto the fixed rope. The cardiac condition her forged documents had hidden finally met the altitude, cold and exertion it needed. Furba went through Paige's pack looking for emergency meds and found everything the clearance letter denied: beta blockers, nitroglycerin, aspirin, a pulse oximeter, a full cardiac pharmacy, 28,000 feet. She carried the evidence of her own lie the entire climb and still handed over that forged clearance. I genuinely don't know what to do with that level of denial. Furba attempted chest compressions at 28,000 feet in the dark on a steep slope. The altitude made it nearly impossible. He managed less than a minute before exhaustion, and the lack of any response made the outcome clear. Paige Dunnigan was 52. The investigation pulled Paige's full medical records. The physician in Houston lost his license. Furba Concha finished the season but never went back to high-altitude work. He told friends what happened at 28,000 feet changed something in him that didn't come back. I want to take a second here because I sometimes get asked why I keep making these videos. It's not about just being a source of income, and honestly, the answer changes depending on the week. Sometimes it's because the stories genuinely keep me up at night, and making the video is the only way I can get them out of my head. Other times it's because I read the comments and realize people actually learn from this stuff. But if I'm being really honest, the main reason is the Sherpas. Their side almost never gets told, and I think that matters more than any of us realize. It was August 19th, 2013, at the abandoned Sunshine Skyway Pier near Tampa Bay, Florida. The remaining concrete towers stood silent above the dark water, closed to the public and posted with warnings that had faded under years of sun and salt. Traffic moved steadily on the active span nearby. Nothing about the night suggested urgency, only neglect and the quiet decay of old infrastructure. Victor Hale was 46. A warehouse logistics supervisor by day, and a devoted urban explorer by habit. He had spent years documenting abandoned structures, drawn to places where engineering outlived its usefulness. Friends described him as patient, meticulous, and stubbornly confident in his own judgment. He had no sponsors or affiliations, only a small online following that appreciated his access to restricted sites. Victor was self-taught in climbing techniques. He understood knots and rappels from books and forums, but rarely climbed in controlled environments. The old Sunshine Skyway Pier was once part of a major bridge, its remaining towers exposed to salt air for decades. Steel bolts and anchors installed during construction were never meant to be reused. Salt corrosion eats from the inside out, leaving hardware that looks intact until it is fully loaded. He arrived after midnight to avoid security patrols and traffic attention. Carrying a rope, harness, and headlamp, Victor climbed the tower ladder to a maintenance platform. He identified an old construction bolt embedded in concrete, partially rusted but still protruding. He clipped in, weighted it gently, and felt no movement. He did not back it up or equalize it with another point. The plan was a short rappel to photograph the underside of the platform. Wind from passing vehicles vibrated the structure slightly. A low hum felt through the metal. Victor checked his device, leaned back, and committed his full weight to the line. The rope went taut, loading the bolt completely for the first time in decades. The anchor failed instantly. The corroded steel sheared flush with the concrete, producing a sharp metallic crack. Victor dropped headfirst, his body rotating as the rope went slack. He struck the edge of the platform with his shoulder before clearing it entirely. He fell more than 70 feet, accelerating past the tower and into open air above the roadway below. Motorists saw a dark figure flash through their headlights. Victor impacted the asphalt headfirst, followed by his upper torso, the force snapping his neck and crushing his skull. The sound caused several drivers to brake and pull over. Emergency services were called within seconds by multiple witnesses. Traffic was stopped, and responders arrived in under 10 minutes. Victor showed no signs of life. His injuries were incompatible with survival, and resuscitation was not attempted beyond a brief assessment. The medical examination later documented catastrophic skull fractures, complete severing of the cervical spine, and massive trauma to the chest. Death was immediate at impact, with no evidence of defensive movement or delayed injury. No equipment malfunction was found beyond the failed anchor point. Investigators noted extensive internal corrosion in the sheared bolt, consistent with long-term salt exposure. The site was confirmed closed and posted at all access points. Victor's equipment was functional and correctly used, aside from reliance on a single anchor. The incident was recorded as a fatal fall from restricted infrastructure. The Department of Transportation removed the remaining exposed anchors from the structure weeks later. Images circulated quietly on local climbing forums as cautionary examples. The danger wasn't dramatic, it was trusting rust. It was July 19th, 2023, at Angel's Landing in Zion National Park, a narrow ridge high above the valley. The air was warm and dry, a light breeze stirring loose gravel. Hikers paused to take photos, while the Virgin River twisted far below and the red rock cliffs rose sharply around them. Nikolai Aoki, 34, had planned this solo trip for months. A graphic designer from Seattle, he mapped trails, researched conditions, and packed for every scenario. Angel's Landing, with its narrow ridges and chain handrails, was the highlight. Months of training with weighted packs and rugged hikes had brought him to the summit, ready for the final half-mile along the exposed spine. The summit plateau was busy but manageable. Hikers clustered near the center, while metal barriers lined the exposed edges, warning of the 1,000-foot drops. Some leaned beyond them for photos. Nikolai set down his backpack and pulled out his phone. The view was breathtaking. The Virgin River twisting below, red rock walls rising all around, and Zion stretching to the horizon. Golden light bathed the canyon as he snapped photos. adjusting angles to capture both the vastness and the vertigo of the edge. Then a sudden gust of wind caught his wide-brimmed sun hat, lifting it off his head. He lunged instinctively, but his fingers closed on empty air. The hat tumbled toward the edge and landed on a small ledge just 6 feet beyond the barrier, clearly visible and seemingly within reach. For a moment, Nikolai froze. Logic dictated he should leave it. Just a hat, replaceable, trivial. But it wasn't just any hat. It was a sturdy, lightweight sun hat he had bought specifically for this trip. It had shielded him from the intense desert sun during hours of hiking, and now it sat there, teasingly close, as if daring him to retrieve it. He glanced around. A park ranger was talking to a group of hikers on the far side of the summit, distracted. Most other visitors were preoccupied with their own photos or conversations. Nobody seemed to notice him. He reasoned that it would only take a few seconds, a couple of careful steps over the barrier. He could grab the hat and retreat safely. The ledge looked solid, the slope manageable, the gravel stable. Nikolai swung one leg over the railing, then the other. He tested his footing, moving slowly, his boots crunching against the loose gravel. He crouched to reach the hat, fingers brushing the brim. Then his foot slipped. A patch of gravel shifted beneath his boot, and suddenly he was off balance. His hip hit the rock first, the momentum carrying him backward. Hands scrabbled for purchase, boots pressed against the ledge, but gravity had already taken over. He tumbled over the edge, body spinning and twisting as he fell. The drop was not vertical, but steep enough to be devastating. He struck a slope section 40 feet down, breaking his left leg and several ribs. Pain shot through his body, sharp and unrelenting, but the slope redirected his path rather than stopping it. He rolled, slid and bounced against protruding rocks, his body moving uncontrollably. After another 100 feet, he came to rest wedged between two narrow rock faces on a ledge approximately 150 feet below the summit. His breaths came shallow and ragged. Every movement sent jolts of agony through broken bones. Above, panic erupted. Witnesses shouted for help, their voices echoing through the canyon. The park ranger sprinted toward the edge, trying to get a view of Nikolai, while other hikers froze in disbelief, calling 911. The ledge was inaccessible, too steep from above, exposed from below. The canyon's notorious winds complicated the arrival of a helicopter. Time became an agonizing blur. Nikolai's vision blurred as he tried to move, shifting slightly to find a better position, wincing as his leg and ribs screamed in protest. Every breath was labored. His body had already begun to shock. The heat of the day offered no comfort now, replaced by a cold, creeping numbness from blood loss and trauma. 3 hours later, trained rangers rappelled down to his location. Each movement was slow, methodical, careful. One wrong step on the narrow ledge could trigger a second fall. By the time they reached him, it was clear that he had succumbed to his injuries. The medical examiner later confirmed that Nikolai had died almost instantly from the impact with the rocks during the fall. Investigators reconstructed the incident with help from witnesses. Multiple hikers had seen him climb over the barrier to reach the hat. The ranger confirmed that warning signs were clear and the railings properly installed. The death was ruled accidental, yet park officials emphasized the incident as a cautionary tale about the consequences of ignoring safety measures. Nikolai's hat was never recovered. Likely, it fell to the canyon floor during the fall or subsequent rescue operations, lost among the rocks and vegetation over 1,300 feet below. His phone was found in his pocket, undamaged. The last photo on it captured the view from Angel's Landing moments before the fall, a perfectly framed shot of the canyon, a silent testament to the moment that cost him his life. It was February 11th, 2018. The steep alpine couloirs above a Colorado backcountry area had been closed due to extreme avalanche danger following 3 consecutive days of heavy snowfall that deposited over 30 inches of unstable powder. Finn Okafor was 26, a ski instructor from Michigan with moderate mountaineering experience, including several alpine couloir climbs in the Rockies and Cascades. He'd taken an avalanche awareness course 2 years prior and had summited several 14,000-foot peaks via snow climbs. Finn was visiting Colorado and wanted to climb a route called Dragon's Tail, a steep snow and ice couloir approximately 800 feet tall with an average angle of 50 degrees. He planned to ascend using crampons and ice axes. Finn carried an avalanche beacon, probe, and shovel, proper safety gear, but was climbing alone, meaning rescue would be impossible, even with a beacon signal. Steep couloirs are natural avalanche funnels. When a slab releases above a climber in a narrow gully, there is no escape. The debris has nowhere to go except straight down the fall line, concentrating into a deep, fast-moving mass. Climbers caught in couloir avalanches are often buried under significantly more snow than those caught on open slopes, and the narrow confines make rescue extremely difficult. A solo climber caught in a couloir avalanche has virtually no survival chance, even with proper safety equipment, because there is no one to conduct a rescue. Finn reached the base of Dragon's Tail around noon, where signs clearly marked the closure and detailed the high avalanche danger. He assessed the couloir visually from below and saw no obvious signs of recent avalanche activity. He did not perform a snow pit test or observe for red flags like shooting cracks or whumping sounds. He began climbing around 12:30 p.m. The first 200 feet went smoothly. The snow was deep but consolidated enough to accept his crampon placements. He moved steadily upward, placing his ice axes rhythmically and kicking steps into the slope. The couloir walls rose steeply on either side, funneling his route into an increasingly narrow channel. At approximately 350 feet, Finn paused to rest. The angle had steepened noticeably, requiring more deliberate movements. He could see the couloir narrowing further ahead before opening near the summit ridge. He continued climbing. Around 450 feet up, Finn placed his ice axe into the snow for his next move. The impact sent a small shock wave through the snowpack. He felt a subtle settlement beneath his feet. Then he heard it, a deep whoomph, as a weak layer collapsed somewhere in the snowpack above him. A fracture line cracked across the couloir, approximately 150 feet above his position. The slab, compressed into the narrow channel, released all at once, roughly 80 feet wide and 2 feet deep. The avalanche funneled directly down the couloir toward Finn at accelerating speed. He had perhaps 3 seconds of warning. He attempted to move laterally toward the rock wall, but was immediately engulfed. The force knocked him off his feet and ripped his ice axes from his hands. He tumbled violently, completely disoriented, as the avalanche carried him downward. Snow packed into his mouth and nose. His body slammed into the couloir walls repeatedly. The avalanche carried him approximately 400 feet before the debris began slowing near the base of the couloir. Finn came to rest buried under roughly 5 feet of compacted snow. He was positioned on his side with his arms pinned tightly against his body. No air pocket formed. The weight of the snow compressed his chest completely, making breathing impossible. He couldn't move any part of his body. Consciousness faded within minutes as oxygen deprivation took hold. His heart stopped shortly after. No one witnessed the avalanche. Finn's absence wasn't reported until early evening when he failed to return to his lodging. His car was found at the trailhead the following morning. A search team deployed that afternoon detected his beacon signal at the base of Dragon's Tail and located his body after 20 minutes of probing buried under 5 feet of debris. The beacon was still transmitting when they found him, and all his safety gear was present and functional, but it hadn't mattered. His body showed fractured ribs, a broken left arm, severe contusions, and a concussion, but the cause of death was compressive asphyxia. Analysis of the debris revealed a classic weak layer structure. Recent heavy snowfall loaded onto a faceted layer formed during a cold, clear period the previous week. His climbing track was visible in the remaining snow leading up to the fracture point. The death was ruled accidental by asphyxiation from avalanche burial. Investigators noted that Finn had ignored closure signs and climbed alone into terrain where even proper safety equipment couldn't have saved him. Solo climbing in avalanche terrain eliminates the only realistic chance of survival: immediate companion rescue. It was May 11, 2018. The northeast ridge of Everest, approached from the Tibetan side, is a longer and more technically exposed route than the standard southeast ridge out of Nepal. Above 27,000 feet, it narrows into a series of rock steps requiring genuine technical climbing with near vertical drops on both sides and limited margin for error. In 2018, sections of the upper northeast ridge were under active review by permitting authorities following a series of incidents on unpatrolled stretches above the second step. The regulatory changes that would formally restrict access to those sections were finalized, but not yet in effect. Keith Weil was 44 years old, an underground mine engineer from Flagstaff, Arizona. Narrow tunnels, unstable rock, systems that could fail without warning. That was his daily work environment. He'd summited the Southeast Ridge in 2014 and wanted the Northeast Ridge as a second route, a personal benchmark, nothing more. He applied for and received his permit in late 2017, months before the regulatory review concluded. By the time the new restrictions were formalized, his permit was already valid and non-refundable. So what do you do when the section the new rules were specifically written to close off is the exact section your approved route passes through? Keith's answer was to proceed anyway. The Northeast Ridge, above 27,800 feet, has significantly less fixed rope infrastructure than the Southeast Ridge. Fewer teams, less traffic, less maintenance, and problems that go undetected a lot longer because of it. In 2018, the rope above the third step hadn't been inspected or re-anchored that season. The team contracted to service it had pulled out early due to logistical issues unrelated to conditions. Keith's guide flagged this before they left base camp. Keith acknowledged it, noted the risk, and kept the departure on schedule. His team followed the standard Tibetan side approach, North Col at around 23,000 feet, then camps established progressively up the Northeast Ridge over several days. May 11th was a clear morning. Conditions calm, wind low on the upper ridge. They reached the second step at approximately 5:30 a.m. The fixed ladder on the near vertical rock face was intact, and they cleared it without incident. Above the second step, the terrain opens briefly, before narrowing again toward the third step, a short but genuinely technical mixed section of rock and ice at approximately 28,870 feet. The fixed rope on the approach to the third step was present, but visibly weathered. Keith's guide examined the first anchor point and noted it felt loose but held when tested. He told Keith directly. The rope was old, the anchor was questionable, and the section had seen no maintenance that season. Keith was a mine engineer. He knew what a compromised anchor looked like. He also knew his permit was valid, the window was open, and the summit was within reach. He decided the anchor would hold. He clipped in and began the traverse. Approximately 40 feet into the section, an anchor pulled from the rock. Freeze-thaw cycling over the winter had worked it loose from its placement, a process that happens gradually and invisibly until the load is applied. The rope went slack. Keith had no secondary anchor point in place at that moment. There was nothing to catch him. He fell approximately 300 feet down the north face before the terrain flattened enough to arrest his movement. His guide, still below the failed anchor point, witnessed the fall and was unable to reach Keith's position safely. The north face below the third step is not terrain a single climber can descend to conduct a rescue at that altitude. A distress call went out from the guide's radio at approximately 7:15 a.m. No rescue team could access that position at that altitude and terrain configuration. Keith's location was identified visually by his guide from above and confirmed by a separate team 2 days later during a weather window. His body remained on the north face. Recovery at that position was not viable. The failed anchor section of fixed rope was retrieved by Keith's guide on the descent and examined at base camp. Cause of death was recorded as fatal traumatic injuries sustained in a high-altitude fall. Contributing factors listed were anchor failure on uninspected fixed rope, absence of secondary protection at the point of failure, and passage through a section flagged for closure under the incoming regulatory framework. The anchor examination confirmed freeze-thaw loosening, consistent with a full winter without maintenance. His permit was valid. The route was approved. The rope had not been touched since the previous season. The guide's radio log, recovered anchor, section, and Keith's GPS data were the primary evidence on record. His permit was valid. The route was approved. The rope hadn't been touched since the previous season. None of that was illegal. And that's exactly the problem. The 2026 framework's mandatory fixed rope inspection requirements before each season's permitted window opens exist because Keith's case made clear that infrastructure accountability couldn't be left to the teams contracted to maintain it. When those teams pull out, the rope stays, and the next person to clip in has no way of knowing what a full winter did to the anchor. It was May 8th, 2017, and Everest Base Camp was bright and still, the sun softening the glacier into a wet sheen. The temperature hit 31 degrees Fahrenheit, mild enough to make the mountain feel almost welcoming. Andrea Farr was 47, from Miami, a hedge fund manager who solved problems with capital. Mountains, she was finding out, didn't respond to money. Her body needed weeks to adapt to altitude, and no wire transfer could speed that up. She had done one rotation to Camp 1, which wiped her out more than expected. The schedule called for 2 more, over 10 days. Andrea saw dead time. The arrangement went through a helicopter company in Kathmandu. Fake a knee injury, get evacuated, have the helicopter land at Camp 2 instead of flying to Kathmandu. She iced and compressed her knee overnight to create swelling. The expedition doctor found inflammation that looked like a soft tissue injury and called for evacuation. I've covered a lot of shortcuts people take on this mountain, but this one is something else. You can buy your way past a lot of things in life, but you cannot buy your way past biology. Red blood cells don't care how much money you have. The helicopter lifted off from base camp and instead of heading to Kathmandu, set down at Camp 2 on the western CWM. Cash to intermediaries ensured the flight log listed a weather diversion near Farich. Andrea stepped onto the glacier at 21,000 feet with a body that had spent one night above 19,000. Her blood hadn't adapted, her lungs hadn't adjusted, her brain hadn't recalibrated. Every system still thought it was at sea level. Sonam Rinjing, 31, her assigned climbing Sherpa with 6 summits, came up with a regular rotation the next day and found Andrea already in her tent. The knee looked fine. Sonam checked with base camp, confirmed the story, and reported what he saw. This woman had not acclimatized. Taking her higher was a medical risk. Andrea waved it off and reminded everyone what she'd paid. They let her try for Camp 3 with close monitoring. At 22,500 feet, altitude her body had 0 adaptation for, she got hit with a crushing headache. Her coordination fell apart. Her crampon placements were sloppy. Sonam watched her responses come slower, watched her eyes glaze over, watched acute mountain sickness speed toward something worse. Sonam told her to go down. Andrea refused. She made it to 23,000 feet before she couldn't clip her own ascender without someone guiding her hands. Her words were garbled. She kept fumbling gears she'd used for weeks. Full haze, severe cerebral edema shutting her brain down. Sonam and a second Sherpa started lowering her down the Lhotse face. Andrea turned combative, her dying brain reading rescue as an attack. She swung her arms, fighting them. And here's the thing that wrecks me about HACE. The person you're saving fights you. They don't understand you're helping. Their brain turns rescue into threat, and Sonam is absorbing punches on steep ice, trying to keep this woman alive. Her ice axe caught Sonam in the shoulder. In the same moment, Andrea unclipped her own harness. She slid right away on the steep ice and fell roughly 800 feet before hitting a rock shelf. The injuries were catastrophic. 800 feet. That's roughly the height of a 60-story building, and the only reason it stopped there was because the rock shelf caught her. Without it, the Lhotse face doesn't end for another 2,000 feet. Sonam Rinjing needed surgery in Kathmandu, torn ligaments that never fully healed. He couldn't go back to high-altitude guiding. He ended up doing trekking work in the lower Khumbu at about half the pay, supporting a wife, 2 kids, aging parents, and a younger brother still in school. Half the income, because a woman from Miami couldn't sit still for 10 days. I don't know how you process that math,